What's up, tribe? How you guys doing? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you like this video. This is your review for Menudo Forever Young, episode 2 of the docu-series is streaming on HBO Max. So, episode 2 is probably going to be the episode where most of us remember Menudo. If you remember Menudo from your childhood, this was when they broke into the American market. And most people didn't even know who Menudo were if you were not if you were not familiar with music out of Latin America, because remember they started in Puerto Rico, but they crossed over into Venezuela and Mexico and stuff like that. So, at the beginning of this episode, they kind of do a little bit of a history lesson. They go back to something called Operation Bootstrap, which was really, on its surface, it was promoted as this great tool for American business to partner with, Puerto Rico, who at the time was, like the biggest colony that the United States had. It's still a colony, child. And I think it's probably still our biggest colony. But of course, the United States invested in Puerto Rico to sort of combat the growing sentiment of communism in the Caribbean area. We had Cuba, and Puerto Rico was sort of like to combat that or what have you. This is what was explained in the documentary, so don't come for me, come for the documentary. But Operation Bootstrap it allowed a lot of Puerto Rican people to come mainly into the New York area to work, where of course they, pretty much were cheap labor. But just like, pretty much everything else in the United States, when it comes to minorities, there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of oppression, there was a lot of exploitation of the Puerto Rican people. They were looked down upon because a lot of them didn't speak English. It wasn't their first language. And of course, a lot of them looked black. I mean, we know that, you know what I'm saying? But they had that olive skin, and y'all know, white America just pushes us all into one category. And Puerto Rico, actually, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, actually at that time, it rivaled any other celebration in New York, including the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade and the St. Patrick's Parade. But it didn't get a lot of coverage. It didn't get a lot of news coverage, and it was never really given a lot of positive coverage. And of course, it had a lot to do with, again, racism, exploitation, or what have you. So, with Menudo coming into the United States, when they came into New York, they shut New York down. And it really took America by storm, because a lot of people, like I said, didn't even know who Menudo was. But for them to come and they had these girls that shut downtown, New York, Manhattan off. They did 4 sold out shows at Madison Square Garden. There were girls lined up at, in front of their hotel room screaming and hollering. And, a lot of the news reports compared it to like the British invasion, compared it to, Beatlemania. And again, a lot of Americans were like, who are these little boys and what in the hell? Like, where did they even come from? So they shut down JFK Airport. Like, it was just a lot. It was a big sense of pride for Puerto Rican people, because of course they were like, yeah, that's us right there. That's us. So, just like anything else, RCA, big record company at the time, they signed Menudo to a major recording contract for them to sing in English. Remember, Menudo was making albums, but all of their music was in Spanish. They were making 2 albums a year, but all of their music was in Spanish. So this was their first record label for them to sing in English. And of course, that opened up all sorts of doors once they started singing in English. They started getting endorsement deals. You guys remember Menudo on ABC. I know I remember, whenever people say Menudo, I always remember Menudo on ABC, Menudo on ABC. And I even remember some of the Menudo songs, the English songs, because when they were showing clips of the videos, I was like, oh, I remember that. And so that just opened up a whole new world for them. And of course, they were making money hand over fist. They had endorsement deals with Pepsi. They had endorsement deals with Crest. They had, like I said, they had the partnership with ABC, where they would do the morning cartoons. What it was like these video clips that they would infuse in between the cartoons and like during the commercial breaks, where they were singing, but it incorporated like how to say certain words in Spanish and in English to try to help kids learn, Spanish or what have you. They signed on to be ambassadors for UNCF, which is under the model. I was gonna say model UN. That's high school. Underneath the UN, which is the education fund for the kids that come through the UN or what have you, the countries and stuff like that. So it was a lot. They just exploded, and they were ridiculously everywhere. But here's where the first sort of lines of strife started coming in. So they signed their first American singer, because at that time only 2 of the kids were bilingual. So whenever there were interviews, whenever they needed to have a spokesperson or what have you, it was always the same 2 guys, because the rest of the guys didn't speak English. So they were always translating for them and stuff like that. They even showed where they did a cameo on Silver Spoons. And I remember that once they showed it, I remember that episode, and I was like, oh my gosh, like Menudo really was everywhere. So they signed Robbie, and I remember Robbie. I remember the face, and I was like, okay, well, Robbie was their first American-born singer. And he, they actually signed him. He wasn't part of the normal, like, rotation, because before, they wouldn't replace somebody until somebody left the group. And remember, whether they got too old, they aged out, or their voice started changing. So the 5th member, he said that they got an opportunity to present at the Grammys, and they brought Robbie on as a way to introduce Robbie as the new member. But because they didn't want more than 5 guys up there, the 5th guy, the 6th guy, he had to sit out. And they actually presented the Grammy to Michael Jackson, and he was like, he was my idol, and it hurt. I was still a member of the group, but I wasn't there that night. I wasn't allowed to be there so that they could, open the door for Robbie. And of course, he eventually, he was the next one out anyway. But he was just talking about how hurtful it was and how it started changing things during that time. Also, Ray, Ray was one of the singers in the group. He was one of the younger ones that they signed on, and his brother actually sang backup for them. So it was him and his brother were, in the group, or like a group adjacent. His dad actually started traveling with them, and his dad started seeing what was going on as far as the kids being overworked and not being fed and not being treated very well and not being, watched over and protected. And he started complaining, and he started making waves, and he was like, yo, like, like a couple of times he even insisted certain things be done, like, oh no, they haven't eaten yet, they're not going to rehearse anymore until you feed them, like things like that. And so y'all know what happened with that. Ray ended up getting put out the group before his time, and it was hard for them to explain it because everybody knew that Ray wasn't of age, and they tried to say, oh, well, he got to be too tall, which was a lie. And then they were like, oh, well, his voice started changing, which was a lie. So, like, the outside press realized, oh, wait a minute, why is he gone? And so they kept trying to explain why he was gone before his time to leave, but he got put out because his dad was asking too many questions and was involving himself too much. And how dare his father want his son to be treated right? Oh my goodness, how dare he, right? Okay. So he was kicked out of the group. Okay. So let's get into the money a little bit. So the episode starts talking a little bit about the money and how this money situation was working. Like I said, they had all of these big endorsement deals that were coming in now. But the way Diaz kept control over the group, remember, he had a different contract with each kid. So nobody's money looked the same. Nobody's deal was the same. And the representative from RCA was like, listen, we weren't privy to the deals he had with the kids individually. So we paid him, and he was responsible for paying the group. And so whatever, if their deal said they make $7,000 a week, he just paid them $7,000 a week. The other kids' deal, like I told you in the last episode, Mike said they get a percentage, so he paid them their percentage. And when they started doing the endorsement deals, each kid individually was paid. Like if the endorsement deal was worth $20 million, well, I'll just use a round number. Yeah, $20 million, and each kid was entitled to five. I mean, they weren't making that kind of money, but was entitled to $5 million. But what Diaz was doing was he was taking the whole $20 million and then just giving them what he was contractually obligated to give them. And one of the members was saying how he accidentally saw a check with his name on it for $50,000, and when his father questioned it, basically they were like pretty much told, okay, fine, you can take this little $50,000, but that's it. That's a wrap. You're done. You're kicked out of the group. You don't get any more money, or you can keep working, keep being a part of the group, and you could probably end up making more than $50,000. And he was like, we were young, my dad was, and we went along with it. Like we stayed with the group, One of the boys said that his father actually, I think the same guy, his father did actually take their contract to a lawyer, and the lawyer told him this is a bad contract. This is a bad deal. But he wanted to be a part of the group, and he really, remember, Menudo was like royalty in Puerto Rico, like royalty. And a lot of them felt like this, they knew that it was only temporary. They knew that they weren't in the group forever, but they thought it would open up enough doors that it would take them to that next level, and they would continue to make money, and that Menudo, being a part of Menudo, being on their resume, would be the thing that would catapult them to whatever the next thing they wanted to do in their life. Because most of them could sing. Most of them could perform. So they felt like, okay, Menudo is the stepping stone. So they didn't really want to burn any bridges either. They didn't want to make too many waves. They didn't want to burn the bridges, right? So by the late 80s, things weren't going too well. Their record sales in America were not that great. Like, they were doing decent, but they definitely weren't at the level where they started. Like, each year they were selling less and less albums. And of course, I'm sure they had a record deal that said they had to maintain certain things. Well, this is the representative from RCA was saying, and they weren't doing that. Now, what they all agreed was that a lot of it is gone back to good old homegrown American racism. A lot of people radio stations didn't want to play they weren't going to play their Spanish speaking songs at all. And then when they started recording in English, they still didn't know where to necessarily put them in the rotation. Remember, there was no era of big band. Like, they pretty much set the mold for these boy bands. And so when the NSYNCs and the Backstreets, weren't around until, a few years after this was going on. And so they still didn't know necessarily where to place them in the rotation. And of course, again, a lot of it went back to racism, of them not necessarily wanting to highlight these kids from Puerto Rico, these, Latina kids. So that, or Hispanic kids. So that had a lot to do with the racism as well. But ultimately in 1987, RCA dropped them. And that really was the beginning of the downfall, because even though they were making probably millions of dollars in those couple of years that they were signed to RCA, and they were getting the endorsements and all of that, the money was running out. I'm sure they've spent more, as much as they made, if not more. And they ended up going into bankruptcy, and Diaz ended up selling the company, because he had made Menudo was an actual company. So he ended up selling the company, but he was still the front man. So whatever the deal was that he made, he still was in charge of the group. He still took care of the day-to-day operations. He just got rid of some of the liability of actually being the sole proprietor of the Menudo brand. And the members said they went from, flying private jets to back on buses with no air conditioning, and they went back to Latin America, which is what they knew. So they went back to Venezuela, they went back to Mexico, and they were selling out. Like, they were doing well, but again, the markets are smaller, the money isn't as prominent as it was when they were in the US market. And at this point, they ain't talking about Europe at all. Like, they're only talking about America and Latin America and South America. So that's really interesting. at this time they had a lot of downtime, like all of that go 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 go, performance rehearsal record, performance rehearsal record, like those days are gone. They actually said that there was about 8 months that they pretty much didn't do anything. They were filming this soap opera, like a telenovela, down in Mexico, and they were pretty much left by themselves. They were left to their own devices, and once again we're talking about kids left alone with a lot of access to a lot of things that they really shouldn't have access to. And a lot of the kids during this time period started getting into drugs, and started getting into girls and sex and being exposed to a lot of things because there was nobody there to protect them. Diaz wasn't there. He was off somewhere trying to, make money and make deals and get them back in the thick of things. Jose, who was their choreographer and sort of like their all around everything else, he was there, but he wasn't their babysitter. He wasn't making sure that they were good. He was just making sure they disappear or something. It was during this time Robbie left the group. They said Robbie, it just was too much for him. They alluded to maybe him having some issues, but they didn't really go into details as to what those issues might have been. But they said it was around this time he left the group altogether. And it was also during this time that the group started, their sound started changing, and they started being less teeny bop, box band, more rock. Some of the guys they were bringing on, they started growing their hair long and wearing, the leather pants, and it was becoming more of a rock style than what it was before. And again, the kids were getting into drugs. One of the keyboardists actually OD'd on drugs while they were on the road, and they didn't even tell the parents. Like, the parents didn't even know what had happened. And remember, these were not the days of social media where everything, TMZ is posting everything every 5 minutes. And so it took a while for the parents to even know that their keyboardists had overdosed while they were literally on the road. In 1990, this is towards the end of this episode, and this was, I guess, the beginning of the downfall of Menudo. But in 1990, two of the members were arrested. Robbie left the group. Sergio and Ruben. Sergio and Ruben they flew into Child Some Airport. And normally they said they had been doing drugs for a minute. They had been doing cocaine and weed and whatever else, and they had never had a problem before. But this particular time they landed and they saw the drug dogs. Now, we don't know if anybody tipped them off or if it was just status quo at that point that they just decided they were going to search them. But they said they landed, and as they were coming through customs, the dogs were there sniffing, and the dogs stopped right in front of Ruben and Sergio, and both of them were like, "This don't look good." Like, but at that point, there's a certain point where it ain't really like you can't turn around. If you turn around, you're gonna look guilty. So they got arrested and they were charged. And they were basically kicked out of the group. Ruben was saying how, because Ruben had talked about how he was doing, at that point, he was doing a lot of the choreography and he was doing a lot of the lead singing. And, he was saying that he was really hurt by it because he thought that they would maybe give him a second chance or put him on probation or something. He said, but basically, like, immediately they were fired, they were dismissed from the group, and that was it. Like, he said, and here I was thinking I was part of this brotherhood, I was part of this family, and they literally, and it really tarnished Menudo's reputation, because remember, again, you got to remember the 80s, they were doing these Just Say No promos, and, they were ambassadors for the UN, and all these different things, and drugs was just never a part of their story. It was never a part of their situation. And so for two members of the group to be arrested with not just like a little bit of weed, they had hard drugs. But the flip side is the people in the band was bringing them the drugs. They said that their promoters, they would do a show and the promoters were literally bringing them cocaine and bringing them girls. And Ruben was talking about how he said, I wasn't a virgin when I joined Menudo. Now, I don't know how old he was when he joined Menudo, but he said he wasn't a virgin. But he said literally there were nights where they were just bringing him girl after girl after girl. And he said, we had threesomes and we had all kinds of stuff. Like, so these were not innocent kids, but the image was innocent. And then after that, this episode ended with us finding out that all of the members quit. And they cited poor medical coverage, being overworked, verbal and physical abuse, and a few other things. But all of them resigned from the group. So I don't know where episode 3 is going to take us. But that was the end of episode 2. So y'all let me know what y'all think. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.